There's a text message that nobody read. It was sent at 10 to 12 in the morning, New Zealand time, on the 4th of June 2013, from a satellite phone somewhere in the Tasman Sea. It said that the storm sails had been shredded overnight and the boat was down to bare poles, no sail up at all, making 4 knots on a northwesterly heading, and that they would send a course update at 6 that evening. It never arrived. It went into the satellite network, and it stopped there, undelivered, sitting in a system in a form nobody on shore could see. The 6 o'clock update never came either. That message is the last thing anyone has from the 7 people aboard the schooner Nina. Not the last thing anyone heard, the last thing that exists. There was no mayday, no distress beacon, no wreckage, no debris field, no life raft, no life jacket, no body. In 13 years, not one physical object connected to that boat has been recovered from the ocean. This is the story of the largest maritime search in New Zealand's history, and of a family who did not accept the end of it and ran their own for months afterwards with 13,000 strangers and a satellite company. And it is a story I am going to tell you carefully, because there is more invention attached to this case than to any other loss I have covered. Nina was 85 years old. She was built in 1928 on Cape Cod, to a design by Starling Burgess, and she was not an ordinary boat by any standard. She was built to win one specific race, a transatlantic, from New York to Santander in Spain, for a cup put up by the Queen of Spain, and she went and won it, crossing in 24 days. The story that came home with her was that the King of Spain came out in his own launch to congratulate her crew. She became flagship of the New York Yacht Club. She had, by any measure, one of the most decorated racing careers of any American sailing yacht ever built. By 2013, she was a 70-foot wooden staysail schooner, wood-sheathed in fiberglass, owned for 25 years by a man named David Deitch III from Panama City, Florida. He was 58. He had sailed her for a quarter of a century. He worked for a shipping company. He was not a hobbyist. Aboard with him were his wife Rosemary, who was 60, and their son David IV, who was 17. The trip had a specific meaning. David IV was about to leave for college. This was the last long voyage the 3 of them were going to make as a family before that happened. There were 4 others. Evie Nemeth was 73, a computer scientist from the University of Colorado, and in her own field she was genuinely famous. If you have ever worked in systems administration, you have almost certainly held a book with her name on it. She had spent her retirement sailing, and she had crossed a lot of ocean. Danielle Wright was a teenager from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Kyle Jackson was 27, from Bassett, Nebraska. Matthew Wooten was 35, British, from Lancaster, an environmental campaigner who, before he left New Zealand, had set up a birthday fundraiser for a clean water charity. 3 generations, 2 continents, 7 people. They left Opua, in the Bay of Islands at the top of New Zealand's North Island, on the 29th of May, 2013. They were bound for Newcastle, north of Sydney, roughly 1,200 miles of Tasman Sea. Dike reckoned on 8 to 10 days. He knew exactly what he was sailing into. 3 days before they left, he wrote publicly that the Tasman was firing gales out like a machine gun and living up to its reputation, and that they would no doubt be dancing with 1 or 2 of them. That is not the sentence of a man who did not know. That is the sentence of a man who had crossed oceans for 25 years and had made a professional judgment about a boat he knew better than anyone alive. Everything in this video comes from a narrow and checkable set of places. The search timeline and the satellite phone records come from Maritime New Zealand and the Rescue Coordination Center, who published operational updates almost daily while the search ran. The weather routing conversation is on the record, from the meteorologist involved. The later search comes from Texas EquiSearch's own published account. The review of the official search was published in 2014. Everything else, every theory about what happened to that boat, is speculation, including any that sounds confident. I will tell you what was found. I am not going to tell you what sank her, because nobody knows, and the people who loved these 7 have had enough of being told. The Tasman Sea has a reputation among sailors that is out of proportion to its size. It sits in the latitudes where low-pressure systems roll east off Australia, one after another, with nothing to slow them, and in the southern winter, which is what June is, they come through in a queue. Boats cross it constantly. It is also, routinely, unpleasant. Late on the 3rd of June, 5 days out, Nina made a satellite phone call to a New Zealand meteorologist named Bob McDavitt, who is well known among Pacific cruisers as a weather router, someone you ring from the middle of the ocean to ask which way to run. Evie Nemeth made the call. She told him what they had: winds around 60 miles an hour, seas around 18 feet. She asked him for a way out. He told her to head south and to expect a storm. That is an ordinary conversation. Boats have it every day. What it tells you is that, at that point, Nina was in bad weather, was coping with it, and was doing the correct thing, getting professional routing advice and acting on it. The following day, the 4th of June, 2 messages went out from the boat. One was short, asking for an update, and it carried Evie Nemeth's name on it. The other was the one I read at the start. Storm sails shredded overnight, down to bare poles, 4 knots, course update at 6. Read that as a sailor would. Storm sails are the small, heavy, reinforced sails you put up when everything else is too much. If those have gone, you have used up your options. Bare poles means no sail at all. The boat is being pushed by wind on the mast and rigging alone. But 4 knots on a heading is also a boat that is under control. It is not a distress message. There is no mayday in it. Somebody wrote it expecting to write again at 6 o'clock. Their position was about 370 miles west-northwest of Cape Reinga, the far northwestern tip of New Zealand. Records for that position at that time show winds around 80 kilometers an hour, gusting to 110, and swells up to 8 meters. Then nothing. Here is the part that the families have never stopped arguing about, and I want to lay the dates out flat rather than characterize them. Nina went quiet on the 4th of June. At sea, silence is not automatically alarm. Satellite phones fail. Antennas get carried away. Batteries flatten. Boats go quiet for days and turn up fine, and any sailing family knows this, which is why nobody panics on day 2. Concerns were raised with the authorities on the 8th of June, 4 days after the last message. On the 14th of June, the Rescue Coordination Center began a communications search, broadcasting alerts to the vessel and to every other vessel in the area, asking anyone who had seen or heard Nina to report it. Nobody had. On the 15th of June, the Rescue Coordination Center obtained something important from Iridium, the satellite communications company. Not the message itself, the record of it, the approximate position, and the exact time of Nina's final transmission. That position went straight into the search planning. Aerial searching began on the 25th of June. That is 21 days after the last message. Later in June, working with the United States State Department, the Rescue Coordination Center pursued the actual content of that undelivered message and obtained it. It was released publicly on the 4th of July. So the sequence is this. The position was known and used from the 15th. The words were not known until the end of the month. And the aircraft did not fly until the 25th. Now the counter-argument, because it deserves stating properly, there was no distress signal, Nina carried no activated beacon, sent no mayday, and her last message described a boat still sailing. The Rescue Coordination Center was not sitting on an emergency call. They were responding to a silence, and a silence is the weakest possible starting point for a search, because it gives you no position, no time, and no confirmation that anything has gone wrong at all. Every day that passes widens the drift circle enormously. Both of those things are true simultaneously. That is why this case is still argued about. When the aircraft did fly, the scale was enormous. Royal New Zealand Air Force Orions flew 7 separate searches. One single day's radar sweep covered more than 97,000 square nautical miles. The combined area covered ran past 615,000 square nautical miles. There were shoreline searches at the end of June, along the coasts where a drifting hull might come in. Nothing, not a piece of it. On the 4th of July 2013, the Rescue Coordination Center suspended the search and stated its conclusion that Nina had most likely sunk and that the 7 aboard had died. The families did not accept it. Their reasoning was not sentimental, and it is worth understanding. There was no wreckage. In a sinking, something almost always comes to the surface. Cushions, fenders, jerry cans, a hatchboard, a slick. 600,000 square miles had been searched, and not one object had been recovered. And the last message they had described a boat that was still making way. If Nina had lost her rig and her rudder rather than her buoyancy, she would be adrift. And a heavy wooden schooner adrift is not a wreck. It is a very slow, very uncomfortable, entirely survivable shelter with a crew who could catch rainwater and fish. On the 18th of July, they contacted Texas EquiSearch, an American volunteer search organization that normally works missing persons cases on land. EquiSearch took it on. What followed was one of the strangest search operations in modern maritime history. Requests to the United States government to task national satellite imagery over the Tasman were declined. A request for the Coast Guard's drift modeling software was declined. So a commercial satellite imaging company, Digital Globe, provided imagery instead, and it was put online for crowdsourcing. Around 13,000 volunteers around the world sat at their own computers and went through satellite pictures of empty ocean, square by square, looking for a 70-foot boat. They found candidate targets. Aircraft were sent to look at the most promising. Authorities examined others in detail. Everyone came back empty. And then a letter arrived at the Rescue Coordination Center from a man named John Glennie. Glennie is a New Zealander. In 1989, his trimaran Rose Noel capsized in the Pacific with 4 men aboard. He and his crew survived 119 days on the upturned hull before they came ashore alive, long after they had been officially given up. He is the single most credible living witness to the proposition that being written off is not the same as being dead. He wrote to say the search should continue. He said that if the boat in the satellite image was Nina, then in his view there was every chance the crew were in good shape. He was wrong, as far as anyone has ever been able to establish. But he had earned the right to say it more than any other man alive, and the fact that he said it tells you something about why the families would not stop. Was an official review of the Rescue Coordination Center's handling of the search, published in 2014. It identified a number of learning points for improving search and rescue. That is the accurate summary, and I am going to leave it there rather than inflate it, because the family's description of the review and the agency's description of it are not the same, and both parties are still living. What has never been established is anything at all about what happened to Nina. Not the cause, not the position, not the moment. There has never been a wreck, a hull, a spar, a raft, a life jacket, a fender, or a human remain. There has never been a signal after the 4th of June. She is not on a seabed anyone has identified. She is simply gone, in an ocean that averages around 2 miles deep, with 7 people who were alive and writing about their sail plan at 10 to 12 in the morning. If you go looking online, you will find people who will tell you exactly what happened. A rogue wave, a rollover, a seam failure in an 85-year-old hull, a collision with a container. Some of those are more plausible than others. None of them is evidence. And a claim that the boat was later found is not true. 7 years later, in 2020, Matthew Wooten's parents in Lancaster filed a presumption of death notice. 7 years is the point at which British law lets a family do that. That is what the end of this looks like. Not a discovery, not a verdict, but a form, filled in by parents, 7 years after their son sent a text message asking about the weather. His parents said afterwards that the fate of the vessel and her crew remains a mystery. They also said they support a water charity now, because before he sailed, Matthew had set up a birthday appeal for clean water and made a video about it. That is what they do with the day. They give water to people who need it, in the name of a man the Tasman Sea kept. David Deitch IV was 17 years old and was going to college in the autumn. His mother and father had put together one last long passage as a family before that happened, in a boat his father had loved for 25 years, and the 3 of them went out into the Tasman with 4 friends in the winter, knowing what the Tasman is like in winter, because that is what that family did together. Somewhere out there they were making 4 knots under bare poles, and somebody sat down at a satellite phone and typed that they would send an update at 6. They meant it.